Hey everyone, welcome back to another Roman Reacts. We are here today to watch another video for you. This one is going to be a little bit of an interesting one. Just popped up my feed not too long ago, and this one's from Master Samwise. Audience hates political activism, not political art. So I'm guessing it talks a bit about like the different films and shows that just been going on and off about different subjects and like putting in like their own works, when in reality it works far better if you just tell the story or show the story instead of just forcing people to listen onto someone's ideology or stuff like that. So this is going to be an interesting one. So it's not long, like about, let's see, yeah, just under 15 minutes. So yeah, let's just get this a watch. I'll share my intake, and let's just see what this is all about, shall we? All right, we got that set and everything's all good. So yeah, just from the different characters, different stuff, like the having different, like there's good works out there that doesn't need to like share, just forcing people down their throats of this politics and whatnot. But there's other stuff that like does, and I can see set examples up here and what's actually good. So anyway, let's just keep this with an open mind, and let's give this a watch, shall we? So 3, 2, 1.
Imagine, dear viewer, that you are writing the script for a major movie or television show, one that will be seen by millions of people, many of them teenagers or even children. You are tasked with bringing to life the characters whose stories will portray the themes of the narrative, with ensuring that your audience will relate to and be inspired by said characters. And you also happen to care deeply about a completely unrelated political issue. What do? You hold in your hand this enormous power, the ability to ensure that your opinion reaches countless potentially impressionable minds around the globe. Could you possibly resist the temptation to inject your political beliefs into the story which you are writing? That's impossible! If you answered yes, congratulations on having integrity and understanding what your theoretical job actually entails.
Okay.
There is a long-running debate, or rather internet shouting match, about whether or not politics belong in movies, shows, video games, and so forth. Some people say, keep your politics off my art, while others insist that all art is political, or that stories like Star Wars have always been political, backed up with evidence such as this George Lucas interview.
I want to figure out how democracies give themselves over to tyrants.
Any human with the slightest concept of nuance will of course detect a significant difference between what good old George is describing and the random off-the-cuff politically charged one-liners such as these.
Elf workers, taking your trays.
My panda, my choice, Mom.
The former is political art. The latter is political activism injected into and posing as art. There is a substantial difference between worlds created with their own political and social systems and heavy-handed political messaging that was clearly squeezed into the script because whoever wrote the line probably got into a Twitter argument earlier that morning and needed to vent.
First of all, you will never be me.
What Lucas did in the prequels was explore an idea, and perhaps to get his audience, if they cared to think about it, to explore that idea as well. And while the prequels are hardly universally adored, it's safe to say the criticisms of those movies focus more on the quality of the writing than they do on the political themes. Coincidentally enough, and I do believe it was a coincidence, the prequels came out right around the start of the War on Terror, an event that precipitated unprecedented amounts of power being granted to the executive branch of the United States government.
Coincidence? I think not.
But did any of you notice that? Because I sure didn't. For one thing, because George W. Bush, unlike Palpatine, did not stay in power for the next 30 years. And for another, because the politics of the prequels belonged in their world. They fit there. They were not constructed in a ham-fisted, preachy manner that ensured everyone would understand the metaphor, because George Lucas was, first and foremost, a world builder and a storyteller. He cared more about what his audience would get out of his movies than how much of himself he put in. And that legacy of his lives on in Andor, whose plot is undeniably political, and yet Tony Gilroy clearly had no intention of trying to impose his own opinions on hot-button social issues. Rather, he wanted to explore how autocracies establish and maintain power, and how their actions may produce the very thing they intend to suppress, all told through the lens of the people experiencing that struggle on the ground level.
Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear.
People can draw whatever parallels they want to our modern world and political systems, and I'm sure they have. But Andor is clearly missing any of the condescending, sanctimonious quote-unquote lessons that so many other properties have tried to impart upon their audiences.
Right.
Unless you count fascism is bad, I suppose, but that's pretty universally agreed upon to be true. The two sides of the aisle just can't seem to agree who the fascists actually are. And that's about as politically charged a statement as you'll hear me make on this channel. Because although these videos are largely made by me and me alone, I do try to focus them on a particular theme: why stories matter. I do put myself into the scripts, it's unavoidable, but I am not the product. I don't teach the lessons, I don't inspire or influence. The stories do, the characters do. My analyses are, ideally, merely a vessel through which, I hope, my viewers can better understand and appreciate the works of men and women who are far more talented than I am. Which brings me back to a point I made a moment ago.
Sorry. Oh, my cat. My bad.
About Lucas caring more about his audience getting something out of Star Wars than he did about putting himself into that world. This is what storytellers should aspire to do, because it shows that they care more about the experience of the watchers, readers, or players than they do about feeling satisfied with themselves. Now, it's obviously impossible to tell a story without putting something of yourself into it. Your worldview, philosophy, and what you value will obviously influence the tale you tell or the way in which you craft that narrative. However, do you have a philosophy which you want to elucidate? Do you have a theme which you want to explore? Do you have characters whose journeys and arcs will inspire or serve as cautionary tales? Are you writing this story for people you hope will love it and cherish it? Or because you want to hear it? Because you have something to say and damn it, someone had better listen?
What would you say you do here?
The answer to that last question is naturally the most important one. When we get moments like this,
there's only one business in the galaxy that'll get you this rich.
War.
They are rarely well integrated into the story. Quite often, they will jar the viewer out of their immersion in the narrative, which is antithetical to the very art of storytelling. Why is this being brought up now? Does it have any impact on the world or the plot? No. For one thing, it's an idiotic statement, since this war to which Rose refers is, well, this. And obviously there are a gazillion other ways by which one could obtain ridiculous levels of wealth in the Star Wars galaxy. For another, it simply isn't ever relevant again, except perhaps when Benicio del Toro's character tells Finn that the weapons dealer sells ships to the good guys and the bad, and how rich exactly could anyone get selling X-Wings to the Not Rebellion? They have like 20 of them. Anyway, point being that inserting some convoluted point about the military-industrial complex being corrupt and uncaring about good and evil simply wasn't worked into the story. It wasn't a plotline that was explored, it didn't provide any meaningful character growth, it just appeared to be on someone's mind while they were writing Finn and Rose's highly unnecessary scenes, and somehow got included in the final edit. As another example, let's rewind to the Make Numenor Great Again speech, which is another beat that feels like it was forced into the narrative as a random political potshot, because that's exactly what it was. No Numenorian was worried about an elf stealing his blacksmithing business. Some of the men of Numenor were jealous of the elves' immortality and closeness to the Valar, but to twist that distaste of theirs into a year-specific gripe because you just have to try and score some political points is just plain silly. Political or social message injections like this absolutely scream, my opinion on this issue is more important than your story.
That's what you're wrong, kiddo.
It's not. It never will be. Here's the problem, though. Any storyteller is saying something with his or her story. If you're not, your story isn't worth telling. And while I generally think a good rule is to adhere to universal truths when you are crafting the themes for your stories, there isn't always exactly complete agreement among humankind as to what those universal truths are. Any belief about anything can be challenged, can be considered controversial, and thus political. If you don't like The Last Jedi, which I don't, and think that Admiral Holdo was a terrible leader, which I do, you will likely want to back up that opinion. And to do so, you might examine the potential motivation of the writers to write Holdo as they did. And you might conclude that she was likely placed on that bridge because she's a woman who doesn't look like most people's idea of an admiral, and Rian Johnson wanted to subvert our expectations by having her take charge and shut down Flyby Poe. Is that conclusion which I reached inherently political?
I do apologize, but it's true. It's when I watched that and she was over on Poe, it was ridiculous.
Well, let's look at the premises that I believe to be true. Rian Johnson enjoys subverting audience expectations, and Disney, perhaps Hollywood in general, want to place women in traditionally male-dominated roles. The first premise isn't remotely political obviously. It's merely an opinion on Johnson's style of writing and directing, one that is quite widely shared. The second, however, is the promotion of women, the propping up, some might say, a political issue. Short answer, not really, but yes. Long answer, it isn't inherently, but it is, because just about anything to do with any type of identity one might claim has been swept up into the political realm. Thinking that Admiral Holdo was a disastrously bad leader, and that the movie treating her as if she was in the right all along, and thinking that she was given a pass because of her gender, is not a political opinion, but rather a social one. However, we tend to conflate the two. I've done so several times in this script. Picking a side in a social argument must mean that you're on the same side as the majority of people who agree with you. And so many people, maybe most people, will assume a great deal about your political beliefs if you think that way. Or they'll make the opposite assumptions if you think she was justified in acting as she did. I mean, I've heard a gaming YouTuber talk about how he basically became a Republican temporarily after watching The Last Jedi because he hated it, because it's a bad movie. And the only people on the internet who also seemed to hate it were guys like Ben Shapiro. This is what happens when modern-day political hot takes or social issues are inserted into stories that are meant to be loved by a massive audience from both sides of the aisle, as well as from the narthex and the transepts. And if you're thinking, Sam, are you saying studios aren't supposed to have any women of power or authority or influence so as to not provoke the chuds, the incels, and whatever other idiotic insult is being thrown around Reddit this month? Then I have a video that you might want to watch. Seriously, I wish someone would watch this video already. It's been really underperforming. At the same time, however, yes, if you want to succeed as a business, you should absolutely cater to your audience.
Are you not entertained?
I know more than you.
If you don't like your customers and want to change them, become a therapist, not a screenwriter. If your thought process is, our core audience won't like this, but we know better than they do, so we're going to include it anyway for their own good, your product is going to fail and will be swept aside by stories that actually play to the crowd. If you want proof, let's look at the biggest box office hits of this year. Inside Out 2, a family movie with absolutely nothing preachy and no divisive social issues presented. Deadpool and Wolverine, by all accounts, just a lot of dumb superhero fun. Despicable Me 4, wait, really? They're still making those? Anyway, no message or politics as far as I can tell. Dune Part 2, not exactly lacking in politics, but said politics are of Dune's world, not ours. Twisters. It's Twisters. I think you get the point. Now look, I don't mean to come off as one-sided and biased in this video. I am, but I don't mean to come off that way. If it seems like I've been overly critical of liberal viewpoints being injected into works of art, well, those are the examples available. For every my panda, my choice, there is not a panda's a panda, no matter how small, because Hollywood is overwhelmingly liberal. So, in the words of Adam Lambert, what do you want from me? But in the interest of fairness, let's take a look at this pile of garbage from the right side of the aisle, entitled The New Norm.
Hey, pronoun. This bud's for you.
Offensive.
Okay, I think that's quite enough of that.
What?
Putting aside the fact that this sounds like it was written by an AI trained exclusively on anti-woke Facebook memes, and the fact that it has a laugh track for absolutely no reason at all, this shit is not remotely the solution to the woke mind virus. If you believe that good art is being ruined by the other side of the political aisle, the correct response is to make good art yourself, not to do the exact same thing you've been complaining about for a decade now. And while sure, you could say that this is political satire, but satire is supposed to be funny, and thus not exactly the same thing as a giant beloved franchise becoming politically divisive, I have to ask, how is this helping? This garbage is clearly created by people who think a certain way, for people who think a certain way. If it ever actually gets generated, it will only be watched by people with the exact same mindset of the main character of that trailer, and nothing of value will be accomplished.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
As I've said before, create worlds and characters in order to tell a story, not to prove a point. Have a personal philosophy. Determine how that philosophy can be shown through the story's themes. Figure out how to have characters live out those themes. Create meaningful and sensible character arcs, and so on and so forth. If you do want to convert people to your way of thinking, and you are a writer or director, the best way to do that is to tell a good story. To provoke admiration by producing high-quality works of art which depict your philosophy in poignant and thought-provoking ways. Even if I don't agree with your worldview at every turn, I will most certainly certainly respect the fact that you decided to show it to me through characters and a world that you created, instead of dropping in disjointed tidbits of it in a way that jar me right out of the story you're allegedly trying to tell.
You're not all boys. So?
I mean, there are a great many issues about which I am deeply passionate, and which I believe to be of great moral importance, and yet you don't hear me say things like, my expectations for this show were high, but not as high as the tariffs on potatoes, because that's not what this channel is. That's not what you are here for. If I fall prey to that temptation to use my platform to grandstand about social affairs unrelated to the story, character, or theme which I am discussing that week, then I will break the implicit trust between content creator and viewer. The trust that you have in me, hopefully, to deliver thoughtful analyses of a given narrative, arc, or trend within the storytelling industry. If you wanted to hear my political opinions, you would be subscribed to my politics channel. In the same vein, if you, a creative in Hollywood, want to talk about political issue X, make a movie about it. Could be a documentary, could be a political comedy, could be whatever. But be honest about what that film is. I don't imagine most people complained about politics in movies when Vice premiered, because of course a film about a former vice president is going to include politics. When we get down to the core of the issue, it really is at least mostly about honesty. When Hollywood writers sneak in these jarring, ill-fitting lines or story beats that have political or social undertones, it jolts the audience out of their immersion and evokes a negative reaction, perhaps even for those who agree with said messaging, but who care enough about their philosophy or worldview to be annoyed by it being presented in this clumsy, ham-fisted manner. The first few times you do it, you'll probably avoid any long-term backlash. But if you insist on continuing down this path, eventually you'll arrive where the MCU did last year, with a movie whose main draw was the identities of its three leads, directed by someone who is pretty honest about being an activist filmmaker. But audiences didn't want said activism, at least not the audiences of the MCU. Basically, The Marvels was the intersectional equivalent of Christian movies. It was open and honest about who it was for, and thus was significantly limited in its audience. Whether you agree or disagree with the message of such films, secular or religious, you cannot deny that, by and large, fans of fantasy, sci-fi, and superhero genres aren't interested in hearing a homily in the theater. We want to be inspired by the heroism of the protagonists. We want to see them struggle, falter, and even fall, so we can watch them get back up again. We want fearsome villains who, however understandable they may or may not be, are not painted as justifiable in their actions. And we want uplifting and inventive stories told by people who care more about telling those stories than they do about piling up purposeless political points.
That is so true. So I do apologize. I know I paused at the end, but it was already near the end. But this is so true, you know? Every time when someone tries to create a story, you want to create a story that's immersive in the world, and like you create characters that you follow and get, and like you just delve into, and you like really want to be like aspire to, in a way, like with Lord of the Rings, for instance. Aragorn was simply running away from his right as king. He was living as a strider, as a wanderer, and eventually he, over time, became a leader in the sense after the death of Boromir, and decided to continue to unite the realms of men. And then over time, building upon that as a strong leader. Sure, there were pitfalls. Sure, that he had his weaknesses, but overall, he managed to overcome that fear and managed to make him far better as a result of it. And then when you compare, like, the movies nowadays just do not care. They just make something random that just doesn't make sense. And then they preach it off as like, oh, this is our stuff. No, that's not your stuff. It's the stuff that was created by Tolkien. Tolkien created this world, and we're supposed to see it through his lens, not your lens. We're supposed to view it inwardly of all these aspects of these characters and this land, and how big of an impact it creates. And then just every time when people create their own stuff and just like insert it into the world, it just becomes dull. Like with same with the latest Star Wars films. Like Last of the Jedi thing was pure crap because it dumbed down the characters of the classic characters like Luke Skywalker, and then they made a comatose Leia Organa for part of it, and then and rest in peace Carrie Fisher. Yeah, but just everything about this it just felt wrong, rushed. It should have been focusing on them and their story, their worldview, probably at the ends of the ropes, struggling to maintain a sense of balance with everything. And instead, we get like new characters self-inserted essentially, and we followed their story more than we should have followed everyone else's stories. And just it felt wrong. And like the creators of Andor were brilliant in their regard, because they focused on the stories of the whole premise around this. And like, sure, we had politics in it, but like it's the politics of their world, nothing out of our world that is brought in. It should not be that. It's the politics of their world that we follow and try to understand. And then when you look at the Rogue One, where like you follow the stories of like the rebels who managed to steal the plans of the Death Star, and like everything about it that led up to it. And just sure, there were characters that died in the film, but at the same time, they're the ones who managed to make us connect to them. And like, my gosh, no, don't go. And then like, and they end up dying in the end. And like, it just makes the film all the more impactful because of their sacrifice and what they managed to do. And like, it wasn't preachy. It wasn't anything like that at all. It just kept on the main focus of the story. And I could go on and on with this, but just for those out there who want to create stories, make a story that you created, but be allowing the story itself create your own world with its own politics, its own stuff, without inserting anything from the real world. Sure, there might be little thing here and there, a little bob and weave of being able to create this story, but like, make it your own with the world building. So, but it's not a giant self-insert. And just, especially when it was true with what he said with George Lucas creating Star Wars, and it was focused on like, what if the democracy handed themselves over to tyrants? And that's what Palpatine did. He used democracy and pretending to work with everyone else to basically have people give him more and more power until he was strong enough to basically usurp the Jedi and destroying the Jedi Temple and eliminating all the Jedi, so that he can remain in power, so that he could manipulate and continue his manipulations and whatnot for the Sith. And just, oh gosh, I wish people would learn more about this, because this is super important, especially when you're creating stories. So anyway, that's it for me, guys. Hope you enjoyed. I'll be sure to leave a link to his channel, and down in the description I'll put his original links for you to look at yourself. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you had a good time watching along with me, and I'll catch you on the next one, okay? So as always, thanks again for watching, and Romans, salute.